Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're another unscripted movie review. We're going to be talking about the newest film from James Franco called The Disaster Artist. Okay, to even explain a tenth of what goes on in this movie, you need to know about a little film from 2003 called The Room. The Room was a film that was written, directed, produced, and starred in by a certain figure called Tommy Wiseau. Sort of one of those self-contained, egomaniacal productions where it goes off the rails very, very quickly. And the funny thing about The Room is that it wasn't an over-the-top sci-fi. It wasn't a trashy B-movie. It was soap opera melodrama, sure, but the execution of it was seemingly from a character and a person that might seem to inhabit an entirely different reality. It's not a good movie, to say that. And really, if you've only seen the memed portions on the internet, you might not know that's a lot less watchable than it probably gets a lot of credit. But yeah, it's one of those movies that's been considered bad, but it's developed a cult following, partially because people love to laugh at its badness, and yeah, there are some moments that are genuinely funny within that film, but there also is an audience that is appreciating this not just ironically, but unironically. They see something like this and they want to support it. They want to see more come out of that enigmatic figure, Tommy Wiseau. And thus we have The Disaster Artist, a film that has been written and directed by James Franco, and inspired by the book of Greg Sestero, the friend who played Mark in The Room. Here's the key thing. This is clearly a labor of love. This is clear that one of the main reasons why James Franco, who plays Tommy Wiseau in this film, you can tell from every way this film is framed, is that he shows a great deal of affection for Tommy Wiseau as a character, as a person. Really, that's the only reason this film would have gotten made in the first place, chronicling how they left San Francisco, they went to LA, they tried to get something put together, and while Greg's character actually started to have a little bit more luck because he was a decent looking dude, Tommy Wiseau isn't, and he doesn't have a lot of luck. And so, what the hell? They're going to make a movie together, and seemingly with no explanation how Tommy Wiseau keeps funding the damn thing, they make this movie. And it turns into a massive bomb, and yet it becomes that cult following. It becomes that cult classic that so many people have apparently loved enough to make The Disaster Artist a thing today. And here's the thing. I wanted to like this movie a lot, and I do think it's good. I think that James Franco's impression of Tommy Wiseau does try to convey a little bit more depth. And you know what? I will give credit to some of the framing of this movie, because when you hear that Tommy Wiseau had to sign off on this, you kind of expected it might be closer in line with the puff piece, and it's not specifically. There are points that Tommy Wiseau is actually framed as kind of a control freak, a little bit of a monster to be around when in the course of making The Room. And you really don't find out that much about him that you wouldn't otherwise know. You don't know where he's from, you don't know how he keeps getting so much damn money, you don't know how old he is. He is just this figure and that's mad creative vision at the centerpiece of it all. And part of the joy of this movie is, hey, James Franco can really do an impression of that character. But beyond that, it's also the sort of thing where you get the impression that James Franco is fascinated with Tommy Wiseau. That enigmatic creative force that can make something so bad, yet so compulsively watchable for so many people. But here's the problem. I have been involved in the internet. I've seen The Room a couple of times. I've been in that circle, and I've also been a creator myself. Beyond just YouTube videos, I've written short stories and fan fiction, and I got my novel that came out in 2015. So I'm looking from the creator's lens as well when it comes to some of this sort of story. And when you start taking a look from that angle, this movie starts getting a lot less watchable, and I want to walk you through how it gets to that point. See, here's the thing. I do appreciate that all the stupid or brain-headed creative decisions that Tommy Wiseau made, while most of them are framed as, oh my god, what the hell is this guy doing? But more often than not, you get the impression that this movie is kind of surreptitiously giving him a pass, because he kept throwing money at it, and people around him kept enabling him to make this movie. Yeah, there were people who did speak up and actually called Tommy out on some of his crap, but at the same time, you start realizing that any sort of behavior like he did, if it wasn't the time in which it was, he wouldn't have been able to get away with it. And that kind of would have been a good thing, because if it wasn't for him able to turn this into such a mass-marketed and merchandisable product, it would have been a lot uglier for everybody involved, pretty much ruining a whole bunch of careers. Hell, you even see that for one point, where the Greg character is given an opportunity to maybe have a minor TV part on Malcolm in the Middle, and he loses it in order to stick with the Tommy Wiseau in that orbit when Tommy doesn't give him an accommodation, because he's just that unreasonable, apparently. And that's part of the thing. This is a movie made by and for the cult of The Room, and being not really a part of that, it's a little bit harder given what we know about Tommy Wiseau that doesn't make it onto the screen, and we will get to this. But here's the thing. I like a lot of the fashion. I like a lot of the acting. I like how much they go into how much of a living hell it can be on a bad movie set. I appreciate that level of production detail. And you know what? There are a couple moments that are incredibly funny. It's kind of hard not to laugh at some of James Franco's antics in trying to mimic that character. But I will say this movie does have one point where it was genuinely powerful. And that gets to the ending, where Tommy Wiseau, he gets all his stuff ready to go for the premiere of this movie. And of course, he doesn't stop right at the red carpet the first time. He does another walk around the block because he wants to get more of a crowd there. This guy is convinced in his delusions of grandeur, more like. And he goes into the movie theater, and people start realizing, holy crap, this is bad. And they start laughing maniacally at this. And for somebody who has been in the position, not just as someone who has seen his work criticized, often pretty harshly, but if you're ever in the situation where you've seen your work derided or mocked in that fashion, it's hard to watch, especially when you realize how much of himself Tommy likely dumped into that movie. And so he goes outside, and Greg falls after him and tries to convince him, wait man, they're laughing. You still made something. You still created, and that itself has value. Until you realize that it has value, because Tommy's able to go back out and say, I made my comedic masterpiece, or however his accent is, I cannot replicate it. And you realize that it probably wasn't that quick, that he probably had that reaction. And you realize that he had to sign off on a movie like this getting made. And he probably wouldn't let anything that was too real get to the forefront. Because that's the thing, you don't learn more about his character. You don't know where he comes from, how old he is, where the hell he keeps getting the millions of dollars to finance this movie. And when you have a character who is that much of a black box, and you're trying to now project emotions onto him as a creator myself, it feels awkward when he's so willing to accept the alternative interpretation in order to merchandise that thing. And it's specifically under his lens of it. Because I'll be honest, I was around on the internet in 2010 when the Nostalgia Critic riffed on The Room, and how infuriated Tommy Wiseau got about that review, tried to get it taken down. That was a pretty considerable moment at that time in online criticism, and when it was not in a lens that Tommy Wiseau could control, he cracked down on it. And that's where I wish this film had actually gone a little bit harder, been a bit more of a sharper judgment on Tommy Wiseau as a creator. Because, again, when we're in a society right now where creators like Tommy Wiseau are allowed to run roughshod over their cast and do some sexually uncomfortable and explicit things and berate and abuse their actors under some delusion of grandeur here, it's hard to see that stuff then excused by the framing of the actors and of the audience that eventually comes out of it. It expects us to now treat that audience as being entirely genuine in their appreciation of this product, especially when you know that Tommy Wiseau is probably getting a pretty fat paycheck out of all of it. And it's that framing and lens that just doesn't connect for me, because again, as a creator myself, when you see your own artistic vision shifted in such a dramatic way, this is not the text of the film, this is the entire way of how this was framed for him. And it's set up early on that this was a part of his life that he has clearly pouring into this movie. Hell, that was even part of a brief monologue among the actors. Then you realize he's so quick to flip the vision into something that's, hey, it's gonna make me lots of money, it's a great comedic masterpiece there. It's a lot harder to be sympathetic for his character knowing the crap he does, and knowing the crap that a lot of writers, producers, and directors will get away with in Hollywood. And it makes him a lot less funny and a lot less likable, and a lot less relatable even as a fellow creator. And that was really hard for me to justify sitting back here. And when you basically see James Franco, while trying to frame him with a little bit more nuance, ultimately turns out to be a bit of a victory lap for that character. And yeah, that rubbed me the wrong way. It doesn't take away from the movie as a whole. Again, the cast is kind of stacked here. Like when Alison Brie and Seth Rogen show up, they both deliver better performances than I was expecting. And I did appreciate that there are so many people who have this passion for this epically bad movie that they want to try to enshrine something about that creator. But at the same time, when you know about what that creator really is, and you know that ultimately it feels a bit like a love letter to him, a love letter that he probably doesn't deserve or have excused, this is not Ed Wood here, it's really a lot harder for me to watch. Especially as when you know indie directors or directors who have worked in exploitation and who pour their soul in it. Hell, so many YouTube creators who work with nothing and do that sort of thing on the screen. They use handmade, the acting's often not very good. I even started one over the summer and it was fun, but again, it comes with some self-awareness of what it is. It's hard for me in order to then see what Tommy Wiseau does and what you know he did even more of that the film won't show, and it's hard for me to justify that. And it's hard for me then to see the film frame him as being this cult figure that deserves any sort of reverence, because honestly, I'm not sure he does. But beyond that, if you're part of the cult of the room, you'll probably enjoy it. If anything, James Franco and Dave Franco got to make their fan film, and it's clear by the shots of one film opposite the other, where they show the shots that they tried to painstakingly remake. You can tell that they really love it, and good for them. But at the same time, if you're not in that cult, or you're tired of it, or you find the memes overexposed, or you know, well, anything about what Tommy Wiseau has done in the past in order to control the reception of his product, it can get a lot harder to watch. For me, it's a strong 6 out of 10. It's recommended if you're part of the cult and yeah, I like this sort of thing, but I was rubbed significantly not the same way. It still can be pretty funny at points, but ultimately are kind of points that hit a little too close to home and felt a little bit too cringy for their own good. But hey, I'm not gonna deny a man like him creative powers, go ahead. But at the same time, you don't abuse your actors, like, in order to get the performance. And some level of self-awareness in the presentation of all this can only help you. Hell, it's helped me. One of the reasons I'm so happy that I've had people who have been so thoroughly honest with me about my writing, about my delivery here. One reason I have never, ever turned off comments, and I try never to delete comments, is that I'm trying to get feedback from you guys that feels honest, and that I can help to actually be better. Because a film like The Room was made by someone who has never had the word no thrown at them in a way that actually seriously mattered or could stop him. And it's hard to watch a movie full of enablers. That's all. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. But if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process before Patreon messes that up, because yeah, the tiers are going to be changing, I will be making a video to address that. Link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier creators, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. Thanks a lot for watching. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.